Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to talk about the importance of speaking and writing ideas rather than just thinking them, rather than just going through your head and letting the ideas flow, and that being how you come to your conclusions rather than going through a long discussion or a long journal entry or anything like that. You definitely don't want to form your ideas just by thinking about them. You want to discuss them. You want to concretize them in something. That's a very important principle, rather than just thinking them. Because when you think about certain things, you take a lot of things for granted in your mind. You take a lot of premises unjustified, or you use a lot of premises without justification. This is something that I've experienced a lot when it comes to thinking about religion. Back when I was religious, I would take a lot of these unjustified premises and go for leaps from there, just based off my thinking, just based off these bad thinking habits. And until you write them down, until you try to put them out in some tangible form, it's very difficult to notice them when you're just thinking, because a lot of your thinking process is automatized. It's done by your subconscious. A lot of your thoughts are given to you by your subconscious. It's your subconscious is casting up thoughts into your mind, and you just going from there and going where your mind takes you. And a lot of times this leads you into really bad places, into very rationalistic holes, because your ideas are just being moved around in your mind, and there's a lot of unclarity in there, and a lot of things that you misintegrated in the past get used as if they're fully integrated and they're fully perfect and unjustified, basically. And you end up making a lot of unjustified leaps, and you end up getting to a lot of bad places mentally, and a lot of bad beliefs. Now, one way to do this, one really good way to practice or to learn new ideas or to think about ideas, is to write stuff down, or when you're introspecting too, to better understand your emotions, is to write it down. Make sure that you're not doing anything unjustified. Because when you're writing an argument, when you're writing an explanation, you have to write everything and not take anything for granted, because that's basically how writing works. That's how writing flows together. You have to write basically everything, be explicit with everything that you're saying, and basically write down the conclusion that flows naturally from that. Now, if you have a bad conclusion and you're trying to justify that conclusion, you'll realize that you made a mistake somewhere in your thought process. And when you're writing down your justification, you will see that you explicitly write down something unjustified, and then you'll go and try to justify that. That's generally what you try to do. You try to, because when you're writing, you want to have claims that are justified. So you write down this claim, and rather than just letting it float by in the mental fog of your mind, you think, oh, I don't think I justified this. And then, because you see it explicitly on the paper, and you're more likely to catch it. So then you try to justify it, and you realize that, oh, I'm just writing down rationalizations. This is not actually a true claim. So then you can cross that out, or write down, oh, wait, I'm going on a bad path right now. Like, literally, you can write that out in your journal, and then you keep going from there, and see what happens next, because you might come to a different conclusion. You might come to a more true conclusion. And it's the same thing with speaking. With speaking, it's even tougher, because you have to say everything that you're thinking. You say every single thought that you have, and a lot of times you'll realize that you misstate something, or you're saying something unclear, or you actually don't understand this idea that you think you understand, because when you're speaking something, you have to actually put it into words rather than letting it float by in conceptual fog. You have to actually put that into words. And when you hear yourself talk, sometimes it's like, holy shit, I don't actually understand this concept, or this idea that I was so certain about is something that I actually don't really understand or can't actually explain. And until you're actually able to explain something in explicit terms, you don't really understand it. Because what you're doing is just letting it drift by in your conceptual fog, and just applying a certainty value to it that you don't actually hold. You don't actually hold the certainty in this thing, because you can't explain it. You can't properly explain it in explicit terms. But once you're able to explain certain things, you get this new mental clarity with it, that gives you even more certainty in your ideas, even more certainty in your knowledge. This is why, actually, when you're learning something, the best way to learn something is to go and teach somebody else it, because it helps you put it out in explicit terms, and it helps you justify it for yourself again when you're explaining it. and make sure that you actually understand why certain things work together and why certain conclusions happen. and it helps you answer certain questions about certain concepts. Because, like, let's say I'm just talking and I have this question that pops up in my head. I can explicitly state that question and then try to answer it as best I can. Because when you're just speaking, you have to say everything that's in your subconscious. That's basic. If you want to have a constant train of thought, if you want to have a consistent logical flow of sentences, you have to say everything on your mind. You have to just say what your subconscious is feeding you. And if your subconscious feeds you a question, you ask that question. If your subconscious feeds you a statement, you say that statement. And if you realize after hearing that question and statement that you're making some sort of leap in logic, or you're using some sort of unclear logic here. Or I said a similar thing twice there, but yeah, if you're doing something incoherent, you will often notice that, because it's something explicit, it's something in the world. And if there's someone else listening, that other person can catch that thing too and correct you on it. And that will help you better understand your ideas, and it will help you better understand how you got to those ideas as well, rather than just going through the motions in your mind and not actually knowing where you started and where you went from that point, and how you actually came to your ideas. Like, let's think about this in terms of math. It's one thing to know a certain math fact, like x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That's the quadratic formula. It's one thing to know that. It's another thing to know how you derive that formula from 0 equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And that's actually a really easy formula to derive. You just move it's actually kind of complicated, but it's fairly easy if you know a decent amount of math. But yeah, it's one thing to know that formula, but it's another thing to know where that formula comes from and how it interacts with everything else, and why that is the case. And when you write something down, you have to actually understand what you're writing down, and you're consistent in your whole like train of reasoning. But when you think about things, you go through that train of thought, you go through that reasoning, but you ultimately like dismiss it. It just gets thrown away in your subconscious, and you have this conclusion, and the conclusion is what stays. When you write something, the conclusion is not the only thing that stays written down. It's everything, basically, the whole proof. And you can go back later and look at that proof and see, oh, I made a mistake here, I made a leap in logic here, and I can fix that now. I have the tools now to fix that because it's right in front of me. So yeah, go write down your ideas. When you're thinking about something, write things down. Or when you're thinking about something, try to speak it. Try to say it aloud. If you're alone and you're just thinking in your room about a certain topic, just start talking about it. Just start explaining it. That's what this YouTube channel has helped me with. If I have a certain idea, I just go and talk about it. Or if I have something that I need to think about, I just say it aloud instead of thinking it in my mind. But yeah, I think that is all I have to say for today. So thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Peace.